Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, The Uninvited Toll. It was on a damp and grey morning in early October that Hercule Poirot sat in his immaculate Whitehaven mansion's apartment, polishing a particularly stubborn speck from the silver handle of his cane. Outside, the London sky drooped like a sagging umbrella, casting a pallid light upon the polished surfaces of his sitting room. The little Belgian detective, however, was content. He had just enjoyed a perfectly symmetrical breakfast, 2 soft-boiled eggs, of identical size and shape, half a slice of toast on each plate, and a pot of Darjeeling brewed precisely 4 minutes. He had no intention of leaving his comfortable haven that day. Then came the letter. It was brought not by the usual post, but by a messenger in a brown overcoat who declined to give his name. Poirot, watching through the peephole, observed the man's swift retreat down the stairs and disappearance into the morning fog. The envelope was of heavy cream stock, unmarked save for his name, printed neatly, Hercule Poirot, Esquire. He opened it with care. There is something wrong at Coniston Hall. A murder will happen soon. Come quickly, if you value life. There was no signature. No date. No return address. The handwriting was sharp, hurried, with an odd precision that seemed forced, as if the writer were deliberately masking their natural hand. Poirot's eyes narrowed. He read the message again, then folded it along its creases and placed it beside his teacup. A lesser man might have laughed. A prank, perhaps, a melodramatic jest. But Poirot, whose instincts had been honed through decades of navigating the labyrinthine corridors of human motive, knew better. He tapped the letter thoughtfully. Mon ami, he murmured to himself, someone is afraid. And they believe only Hercule Poirot can help. He rose, adjusted the cuffs of his dove-grey suit, and began packing a small valise. He included his brushes, a pocket magnifier, and, most crucially, an extra pair of patent leather shoes, always polished to a mirror shine. By the afternoon, he was aboard the 2:15 train to Windermere, bound for the Lake District and the mysterious Coniston Hall. The journey north took Poirot through increasingly wild countryside. The flat plains gave way to moors and hills, with stone walls snaking across the landscape like ancient scars. By the time he arrived at the small, windswept station near Coniston, the sun had dipped below the mountains, and a thick mist clung to the earth like a secret. A chauffeur-driven Daimler awaited him at the platform, engine already purring. The driver, a middle-aged man with the stiff posture of someone unused to questioning orders, opened the door without a word. "You were sent for me?" Poirot asked, settling in. The man hesitated. "Not exactly, sir. I was told to meet the afternoon train, in case someone came." "Ah," said Poirot softly, eyes bright. "Then someone expected me. How curious." The car wound through narrow lanes flanked by ancient oak trees and moss-covered stones. After 20 minutes, they reached the gates of Coniston Hall, a sprawling Georgian manor built of weathered grey stone. The iron gates groaned as they opened, and the car ascended a gravel drive lined with hedges clipped into perfect cubes, an orderliness that Poirot admired. Coniston Hall itself was an imposing structure, its tall chimneys and shuttered windows giving it a solemn, watchful appearance. The mist swirled about its base like a moat of clouds. A single light burned in the entry hall. Poirot was greeted at the door by a woman of about 50 in a dark dress and white collar, clearly the housekeeper. Her eyes lingered on his face with a curious mixture of suspicion and relief. "You must be Monsieur Poirot," she said. "We weren't expecting guests." "No," Poirot replied, stepping inside and removing his hat. "But perhaps someone was." Before she could answer, a voice rang from the hall behind her. Poirot? Good Lord, is that you? A tall man with streaks of silver in his hair and the unmistakable bearing of a retired colonel appeared. His voice was clipped, his moustache bristling. Colonel Anthony Renshaw, he said, extending a hand. You've arrived at a rather awkward moment, I'm afraid. Most murders are, Poirot said cheerfully. Renshaw blinked. Murder? Good heavens. No, nothing like that. At least, well, come through. I'd better explain. Poirot was led to a drawing room warmed by a large fire. The scent of tobacco lingered, along with something fainter, perhaps camphor, perhaps medicine. Renshaw poured 2 sherries. You must forgive the household. We're all a bit on edge. Sir Hugo Lavington, master of the house, passed away 2 nights ago. Peacefully, in his sleep. At least, that's what the doctor says. Poirot sipped the sherry. And what do you say? Renshaw shrugged. Hugo had a weak heart. Kept to himself these last few years. Lived more in the past than the present. But I confess, the timing is awkward. You arriving now? That letter. There's something strange in the air. Poirot leaned forward. Tell me everything. Well, said Renshaw, lowering his voice, Sir Hugo was found in his study. Door locked from the inside. Slumped in his chair. No sign of distress. But his niece, Isabel, swears she heard raised voices earlier that night. She says he was arguing with someone. There was no one else supposed to be in the house. Poirot's brow furrowed. Did he receive visitors? Not for years. Since his fallout with Alistair Gray. That was over a mine in Rhodesia. Nasty business, best not dredged up. Yet you have, Poirot said quietly. And now, here I am. Renshaw gave a reluctant nod. It was I who suggested we contact you after the letter came. It arrived the morning after Hugo died. No name. No return address. Same hand as yours? He passed Poirot a second note. Poirot compared the handwriting. The same, without question, he said. A hush fell. Then, from somewhere deep within the house, a soft but distinct sound echoed, the ticking of a clock. Then another. Then silence. Renshaw stiffened. That'll be the West Wing. What is there? The old clock room. Sir Hugo was obsessed. Collected them. Would sit among them for hours. All stopped now. He let them wind down after Gray vanished. An entire room of clocks, murmured Poirot. And no 2 ticking. He stood. I think, mon colonel, that I would like to see this room. Chapter 2, The House of Hidden Echoes. The west wing of Coniston Hall lay shrouded in a silence so complete it seemed to press against the ears. The corridors were longer here, the floors darker, the wallpaper faded and slightly curling at the edges. Poirot followed Colonel Renshaw along a carpet runner worn by decades of cautious footsteps. Sir Hugo kept this wing closed to all but a few, Renshaw said over his shoulder. Even the staff were discouraged from entering without permission. A private sanctuary? Poirot asked. Something of the sort. His retreat from the world. You'll see why. They stopped before a heavy wooden door, arched at the top and bearing a brass handle that had dulled with age. Renshaw withdrew a large iron key from his coat and unlocked it with a click that echoed like a gunshot in the stillness. The room beyond was long and dimly lit. Tall sash windows stood cloaked in heavy velvet drapes, and the air had a faint scent of oil and dust. But what drew Poirot's attention immediately were the clocks. Dozens of them. Mantel clocks, carriage clocks, ornate gilded French pieces, stately grandfather clocks, and even a few humble wooden wall clocks. They lined the walls, perched on tables, stood in rows upon cabinets and shelves. All were stopped. None showed the same time. One displayed 2:03. Another, 8:47. A third, curiously, read 3:07. Poirot's gaze lingered on this last one. 27 in all, said Renshaw quietly. He used to wind them every Sunday morning. Claimed it brought him peace. Then he simply stopped. Poirot approached the largest of the grandfather clocks. Its hands were frozen at 6:12. He opened the glass door gently and found the winding key still in place. Odd, he murmured. To abandon a routine so meticulously kept. After Gray disappeared, Hugo changed. Grew secretive. Withdrawn. This room, his so-called a chamber of time, it was his obsession. He once told me that hours were like people. Each one chimes with its own intentions, he said. I didn't understand him then, and I don't now. Poirot moved slowly, his eyes narrowing as he studied the placement of the clocks. Each seemed deliberately placed, yet without any obvious pattern. He reached for his pocket notebook and jotted down the times displayed on 5 of them. Renshaw watched him with mild amusement. You think the clocks are important? I think, said Poirot, that everything in a dead man's sanctuary is important. Even that which seems absurd. He turned to examine the windows. The latch on one was rusted but not locked. He opened it slightly and inhaled. The air outside was damp and earthy, scented with pine. Below the window was a narrow stone ledge and a sheer drop into the garden. No ladder. No footprints. Renshaw cleared his throat. You mentioned something earlier, about someone expecting you. Poirot nodded. The letter that summoned me arrived before news of Sir Hugo's death. That suggests foreknowledge. An intent. So someone knew he was going to die. Or feared he would. Poirot paused. Was the study, where he was found, far from here? Renshaw nodded. Quite the distance. East side of the house. This wing is almost never used now. Poirot took one final look around the room before they left. As Renshaw locked the door behind them, the ticking sound returned, briefly, faintly. Then it was gone. Back in the main hall, the household was gathering for supper. Poirot, always punctual, joined them. The dining room was large, its walls adorned with ancestral portraits. A fire crackled gently in the hearth, throwing golden light over the polished silver and crystal. At the table sat Lady Edith Lavington, Sir Hugo's widow, a tall woman with elegant bone structure and hair pinned in a perfect French twist. Her expression was unreadable, but she observed Poirot with a cool detachment. Next to her sat Miles Lavington, Sir Hugo's only son, recently returned from Rhodesia. Miles had an athletic build, sun-darkened skin, and the slightly impatient air of a man unused to silence. He greeted Poirot with a firm handshake but avoided prolonged eye contact. Can't imagine what brought you here, monsieur, Miles said between spoonfuls of consommé. We've already had the doctor in. Father passed in his sleep. Ah, but you see, it is not always the sleep that is natural, monsieur, Poirot replied gently. Sometimes it is induced. Lady Edith stiffened. Are you suggesting something criminal, Monsieur Poirot? I suggest nothing. I observe, I listen, and in time, I detect. The fourth guest at the table was Isabel Lavington, Sir Hugo's niece, a young woman of perhaps 23. She was pale and slight, with chestnut hair and large, expressive eyes that darted from Poirot to the others like a rabbit in a field of hawks. She spoke little during the meal but responded politely when addressed. Poirot noticed she picked at her food and avoided the wine. After dinner, coffee was served in the library. Poirot lingered beside the grand piano, watching the family with careful eyes. Did Sir Hugo have many visitors in recent years? He asked lightly. None at all, said Lady Edith. We kept a quiet life. After the unpleasantness with Mr. Gray, Hugo preferred solitude. And who is Mr. Gray? Miles exhaled through his nose. An old business partner. Father left him behind during a mine collapse in Rhodesia. Gray survived, somehow. Sued. Tried to ruin us. Indeed. Poirot leaned forward. And where is he now? No one knows, Lady Edith said coldly. He vanished 3 years ago. Perhaps he died after all. One can hope. Isabel spoke for the first time. He sent a letter last spring. I saw it on Uncle Hugo's desk. He burned it. A silence fell. Poirot sipped his coffee. Did he seem distressed afterwards? Isabel nodded. More than usual. He spent that night in the clock room. Poirot set his cup down carefully. Time, it seems, is at the heart of this matter. Later, in the guest bedroom prepared for him, Poirot unpacked his suitcase with the same methodical care he brought to murder investigations. He placed his brushes on the dresser, his evening slippers beneath the bed, and the mysterious letter that summoned him on the bedside table. He sat down, folded his hands over his stomach, and stared at the ceiling. There was tension in the house. Secrets woven into the very walls. The clocks in the West Wing were more than relics, they were messages, perhaps, or markers. And one clock, 3:07, ticked briefly when all others were silent. Poirot smiled faintly. Mon ami, he whispered to the silent room, you have called me here with good reason. And Hercule Poirot does not answer in vain. He turned off the light. Outside, far across the house, a clock chimed once. Then all was still. Chapter 3, The Will and the Watch. The next morning dawned bleak and damp, the grey skies having settled like a second roof over Coniston Hall. Rain peppered the tall windows, soft and steady, as if the heavens were whispering secrets to the house. Hercule Poirot rose early, as was his custom, and after attending to his toilette with military precision, descended to the breakfast room. The table was already set. Silver gleamed. Coffee steamed. Lady Edith was seated at the far end, buttering her toast with controlled exactitude. Isabel lingered by the window, cup in hand, staring out at the rain-soaked gardens. Miles arrived moments later, hair still damp from a brisk walk, his gait impatient. Sleep well, Poirot, he asked, pouring himself coffee. Well enough, Poirot replied. Though the tick of a single clock troubled me in the night. Miles paused mid-sip. I thought they were all stopped. Indeed. So imagine my surprise when one began to tick. Lady Edith's gaze flicked up sharply. Perhaps the mechanism released itself. Perhaps, Poirot said mildly, though his eyes watched her reaction with interest. But clocks do not choose their moments at random. No more than people do. He turned to Isabel. Do you ever enter the clock room, mademoiselle? She shook her head. Not since I was a child. It always frightened me. Uncle Hugo said time was a beast best kept in chains. Miles laughed, but there was no humor in it. He said a lot of strange things in his final years. Before Poirot could respond, the butler entered and announced, Mr. Percival Clay is here to read the will. They adjourned to the drawing room, where a small fire had been lit against the chill. Mr. Clay was a tall, thin man with a dusting of dandruff on his shoulders and a briefcase clasped like a shield. His voice, when he spoke, was dry and officious. The will of Sir Hugo Archibald Lavington was last revised 2 years ago, he began. Witnessed by myself and Dr. Felix Armitage. It is brief, and to the point. He cleared his throat. To my beloved wife, Edith, I leave my personal effects, jewellery, and an annual stipend of £2,000 for life. To my son, Miles, I leave Coniston Hall, all associated lands, and the Lavington investments in full. To my niece, Isabel, I leave the sum of £5,000 and my books." Isabel gave a faint, brittle smile. Clay continued. "To Alistair Gray, should he be alive and found within 5 years of the date of my death, I leave the sum of £50,000, in recognition of a debt unpaid." Gasps followed. Lady Edith stood sharply. "That man? After everything?" "I am merely the executor, Lady Lavington," Clay said with a stiff bow. "The clause is valid." Poirot, seated in an armchair by the fire, tilted his head thoughtfully. "Who among you has seen Mr. Gray in the last 3 years?" No one spoke. Isabel shifted, eyes on the rug. Poirot turned to Mr. Clay. "And has any attempt been made to locate Mr. Gray?" "Not to my knowledge," Clay replied. "Sir Hugo gave strict instructions that we were not to attempt contact unless Gray came forward himself." Poirot's gaze drifted toward the windows. £50,000 was a powerful motive. More than enough to lure a man from hiding, or to prompt someone to ensure he stayed hidden forever. Was Sir Hugo in good health when this will was made? Poirot asked. Relatively, Clay answered. He was aware of his heart condition, but he was of sound mind. Very much so. Lady Edith sat down abruptly. I warned him it would come back to haunt us. Alistair Gray nearly ruined this family once. Now he gets rewarded. Miles's brow was furrowed. Father never forgave himself for what happened in Rhodesia. But this is madness. Poirot said nothing. He was studying Isabel, who had gone pale, her hands twisting in her lap. After the reading, the household dispersed. Poirot remained behind with Mr. Clay. One final question, Poirot said, as Clay packed his briefcase. Was Sir Hugo's pocket watch included in the list of personal effects? Clay frowned. What you should ask? No, it wasn't. He was rarely seen without it, a gold Patek Philippe with a stag crest on the case. Family heirloom. Poirot nodded. Then we must assume it is missing. That afternoon, Poirot sought out Dr. Armitage, a lean, scholarly man with wire-rimmed glasses and a voice like dry paper. The death certificate, Poirot began, states heart failure. Yes, Armitage said. Sir Hugo had been declining steadily. I saw no need for an autopsy. And yet, Poirot said mildly, you were also a witness to a will in which a vanished man stood to inherit a small fortune. Armitage bristled. If you're suggesting impropriety, Monsieur Poirot, I assure you. I suggest nothing, Poirot said quickly, with a disarming smile. But I am always curious when the dead leave unanswered questions. He leaned forward. Did Sir Hugo have any medication? Yes. Digitalis. Prescribed in small doses to regulate the heartbeat. I managed it myself. Poirot raised his eyebrows. And is any of it missing? Armitage paused. Not to my knowledge. May I see it? The doctor hesitated, then nodded. He fetched a leather pouch from his bag and handed it over. Poirot opened it carefully, counted the tablets, and then returned it. All present, he murmured. But what of the brandy? Pardon? The glass found by Sir Hugo's side. Did you test it? No, Armitage admitted. It seemed unnecessary. Poirot pressed no further, but he made a note to examine the decanter himself. Later, in the still of the evening, Poirot returned to the clock room alone. He stood among the silent sentinels of time, letting the quiet press against him. The 3:07 clock stood in the far corner, untouched. He opened the cabinet beneath it, and found nothing. He stood slowly. There were many motives in Coniston Hall. Love, pride, revenge, inheritance. But someone had removed Sir Hugo's watch. Someone had known that £50,000 might change the future, and perhaps the past. Poirot stepped back into the corridor and closed the door gently behind him. One question now ticked in his mind. Who stood to gain if Alistair Gray never returned at all? Chapter 4: An Interrupted Night. The wind howled outside Coniston Hall like a wounded animal. Rain fell in sheets, rattling the old window panes. Inside, the air was thick with unspoken tension. Supper had passed in stiff silence, broken only by the occasional clink of silver on china. Even Miles, typically brusque and cavalier, had seemed subdued. Isabel barely touched her food. Lady Edith had excused herself early, claiming a headache. Poirot retired not long after, his mind abuzz with unanswered questions. A will rewritten in secrecy. A vanished pocket watch. A man named Alistair Gray, both dead and not. And those clocks, 27 monuments to a mystery yet unsolved. He changed into his dressing gown, lit a small lamp, and seated himself at the writing desk in his room. From his notebook, he reviewed the times displayed on the clocks. The 3:07 clock, still ticking when all others remained still, stood out like a single note in an off-key symphony. It was just past midnight when Poirot turned down his lamp and lay back on the bed, though he did not sleep. His mind, ever active, arranged details like chess pieces on a board. Somewhere in the pattern was the truth. It simply had not yet revealed itself. And then, it came. A faint sound. A soft thud, followed by a creaking floorboard. Poirot sat upright, alert. He crossed the room silently, slipped on his slippers, and opened the door into the dark hallway. A weak light glowed from the stairwell at the far end. Poirot moved carefully, listening. As he reached the landing, a new sound drew his attention, tick, tick, tick. It was coming from the west wing. He turned toward the source. The door to the clock room stood slightly ajar. Poirot approached, heart beating steadily. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. One of the clocks was ticking. The 3:07 clock. And beneath it, on the floor, something pale caught his eye. He crouched and picked up a torn scrap of paper. It had been ripped hastily from a letter or notepad. On it, written in a familiar, careful hand, were the words, "Gray will destroy us. Must act." The rest was missing. Poirot's brow furrowed. He took the paper to the desk by the window and examined it under the low lamp's glow. The ink was fresh. The handwriting, elegant but shaky, matched that of Sir Hugo's entries in the library ledger. He was interrupted by a sudden shriek, piercing, then abruptly cut off. Poirot spun on his heel and ran to the hall. He reached the main staircase just in time to see Isabel Lavington crumpled at its base, motionless, her head twisted at an unnatural angle. Miles and Lady Edith came running from opposite ends of the house, nightclothes flapping. "My God!" Miles cried. "Isabel!" Poirot knelt beside her and gently checked her pulse. "She is alive," he said quickly. "But unconscious. We must not move her." Dr. Armitage arrived moments later, summoned by a frantic housemaid. After examining Isabel with brisk efficiency, he reported a concussion and bruised ribs, but no spinal damage. "She's lucky," he murmured. "If she fell from the top, it's a miracle." Or, Poirot said softly, "she did not fall." All eyes turned to him. "What are you saying, monsieur?" Lady Edith asked tightly. "I am saying the floorboards on the landing show a second set of footprints, beside Isabel's. Smaller than Miles's, larger than mine. Someone was with her." "No one in this house would harm her," Edith snapped. Then perhaps, Poirot replied, someone outside the house has entered. Miles scoffed. Impossible. The grounds are locked. The weather's a wall of rain. Poirot glanced back up the staircase. Locks are for the honest, monsieur. The house settled into a tense quiet after the doctor carried Isabelle to her room, assisted by the butler. Poirot returned to the clock room and examined the 3:07 clock once more. Its hand still moved, slow and steady. And now, tucked behind its casing, he found something else, a small, tarnished key. Not a clock key. A cabinet key, perhaps. Or a drawer. He pocketed it. The following morning was grim. Isabelle remained unconscious, though stable. Dr. Armitage had sedated her and advised complete rest. Poirot took his morning tea alone in the library. Rain tapped at the windows like impatient fingers. Miles soon joined him, pacing like a restless wolf. She didn't just trip, did she? He asked at last. I do not believe so, Poirot replied. She was frightened. Perhaps she knew too much. You think someone tried to silence her? Poirot raised a brow. Do you? Miles hesitated. I wouldn't put it past my mother. Poirot turned to face him fully. That is a very grave accusation. I mean it, Miles said. She's not herself these days. She hated Gray. Blamed him for everything that went wrong after the mine collapse. For the scandal. For father's decline. Poirot considered this. Hatred often masquerades as duty. And when pride is wounded, people lash out. There was a pause. Then Poirot asked, did your father ever speak of Alistair Gray to you? Rarely. When he did, it was always with a kind of bitter regret. He said Gray was the one man he wronged, truly wronged, and it was too late to make it right. Perhaps not too late after all, Poirot murmured. That afternoon, Poirot made his way to the study, the room where Sir Hugo had died. It had been locked since the night of his passing. The key was with Mrs. Danby, who surrendered it reluctantly. I was the one who found him, she whispered. He looked peaceful. But not right. Not right. His eyes. They were open. Fixed on the mantel clock. It had stopped. Which time? 3:07. Poirot froze. Are you certain? I am. Inside, the room was as it had been left. The armchair faced the hearth. The brandy glass still sat on the side table. Poirot took a long sniff. Faint. But something metallic lingered beneath the scent of alcohol. He examined the clock on the mantel. Stopped. 3:07. Again. He took out his notebook and wrote one line. 3:07, time of death? Or time of truth? Then he unlocked the desk drawers using the small key found behind the ticking clock. Inside was a folded piece of parchment. A journal entry. If Gray returns, they'll turn on me. Edith will not forgive. Miles will not understand. But I owe him. God help me, I owe him everything. Poirot folded the note and stood. The hour of death was no longer a mystery. But now he had a new question. What, precisely, did Sir Hugo owe Alistair Gray? Chapter 5 of A Whisper from the Past. The rain had lightened to a mist by morning, settling like a veil over the moors. Poirot, ever immaculate despite the muddy lanes and damp air, stepped out into the village of Coniston, his patent leather shoes neatly protected by rubber galoshes, his walking cane clicking smartly against the cobbles. He was not a man drawn to the outdoors, he much preferred the symmetry of rooms and the order of breakfast trays, but there were answers here, among the people who had known Sir Hugo not as a figure of authority, but as a man of flesh and failure. His first visit was to the postmaster, a lively woman with a weather-beaten face and eyes sharp as pins. "Sir Hugo," she said, frowning as she handed him the ledger. "Reclusive, that one. But always punctual with his correspondence. Posted letters every Monday morning. Most often to London, sometimes abroad." Poirot's finger traced the most recent entries. One stood out, A. Gray, Bulawayo, Zimbabwe. Dated 5 months prior. "Have any more gone to that address since?" "No. But I do remember a parcel he received, special delivery. About 6 weeks ago. Didn't say who from." He looked white as a sheet when he signed for it. Poirot pressed gently. "Do you recall anything about the parcel?" "Small. Brown paper. The kind that hides something valuable, or dangerous." He thanked her and moved on, heading for the small office of the local solicitor, Mr. Bernard Sykes. Sykes was an elderly gentleman with ink-stained fingers and a cautious manner. At first he claimed to know nothing of Alistair Gray. But after some coaxing, and Poirot's assurance that discretion was second nature to him, he confessed. "Sir Hugo consulted me in confidence about a man he believed was still alive. A man once left for dead. Gray." "Go on." Sykes removed his spectacles and rubbed them on his sleeve. Sir Hugo had once been part of a mining expedition in southern Rhodesia. A cave-in occurred. Gray was buried. Presumed dead. Hugo escaped, barely. Yet Gray survived. Yes. He emerged 2 days later, half-starved, and made his way back to civilization. He accused Sir Hugo of abandoning him. Poirot nodded slowly. "Did he?" Sykes looked uncomfortable. There were only 2 witnesses. Gray claimed Hugo fled too soon. Hugo claimed he believed Gray dead. They never reconciled. And the lawsuit? Settled privately. Hugo paid him to disappear. Poirot leaned forward. Then why include him in the will? Sykes hesitated. "I believe Hugo wanted to confess something, to make it right, in his own way. But he feared his family's reaction. Especially Lady Edith's." "Indeed," Poirot said. "She strikes me as formidable." Sykes gave a dry chuckle. "That's one word for it." By the time Poirot returned to Coniston Hall, the fog had thickened once more. The house loomed out of it like a ghost ship. Inside, he found Miles in the library, sipping whiskey far too early in the day. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Miles muttered. "On the contrary," Poirot replied, "I've been chasing the very real shade of Alistair Gray." Miles glanced up sharply. "He's alive, then?" "He was. Whether he is now, I cannot yet say. But your father made contact with him. He even received a package. Did you know?" Miles shook his head. "No. But it doesn't surprise me. Father's guilt was a heavy thing." Poirot paused, then asked quietly, "Do you believe your father truly abandoned Gray?" Miles looked away. "I don't know what to believe. I know he came back from Africa changed. He drank more. Spoke less. He stopped trusting people. And then came the clocks." "The clocks?" "He began collecting them not long after his return. Said they reminded him of what he'd lost. I thought it was nonsense." Poirot folded his arms. "I no longer think it nonsense. I believe each clock marks a moment of significance. Perhaps even a person." Miles gave a strained laugh. "If you say so." Poirot studied him. "You were in Africa yourself, were you not?" "For a time. I worked on development projects. Roads. Trade routes. And you returned, conveniently, just before your father's death. Miles stiffened. Are you accusing me? I accuse no one, monsieur. I merely ask questions. Well then, here's a question for you, Miles snapped. Why would I kill my own father when I stood to inherit everything anyway? Poirot smiled. Ah, but that is not the question that matters. The question is, who stood to lose everything if Alistair Gray returned? Miles paled. Later that evening, Poirot visited Isabelle's room. She had regained consciousness but was pale and drowsy, her head bandaged. He sat beside her bed. Isabelle, he said gently, I must ask what happened on the stairs. She blinked slowly, then frowned. I heard something. A voice. I thought someone was in the west wing. I went to look. I don't remember what happened next. Did you fall? I think I was pushed. Poirot's eyes darkened. Do you remember what the voice said? She hesitated, then nodded. The clocks are wrong. The time is wrong. He's not finished. Poirot sat back, silent. He had no doubt now, someone feared the return of Alistair Gray. Someone in the house was determined to silence the past. And someone, perhaps more than one, had secrets that ticked louder than any clock. That night, Poirot returned to the drawing room. Alone, he opened the folded page he had recovered from the study drawer. Sir Hugo's journal entry was cryptic but haunted. I tried to do right. I tried to make peace with the time I stole. But clocks cannot forgive, and neither can people. Edith suspects. Isabelle suspects. Even Miles has begun to turn. Gray is coming. I feel it. And when he does, the hours will strike their revenge. Poirot read the passage 3 times. Then he closed the book, stood, and murmured into the silence. Very well, mon ami. If time is your enemy, then I must become its ally. Hercule Poirot shall win back the hours, and expose the hand that dares to play God. Chapter 6, The Poisoned Glass. The air in Coniston Hall had shifted. Gone was the strained politeness of morning. In its place, unease. Eyes watched more closely. Voices lowered when Poirot entered the room. Even the very walls, it seemed to him, held their breath. After his morning walk, deliberately short due to the relentless drizzle, Poirot asked Mrs. Danby for a private word. I would like to see the decanter from Sir Hugo's study, he said gently. The one from which he poured his final brandy. Mrs. Danby, ever formal, gave a stiff nod. It's still in the study. We didn't touch anything, as you advised. Together, they returned to the sombre chamber where Sir Hugo had been found. It was untouched, preserved like a tomb. The smell of leather and smoke lingered in the air. Poirot crossed to the side table and lifted the crystal decanter. Half full. He held it to the light and swirled the amber liquid inside. Then, removing a handkerchief from his breast pocket, he dabbed a finger in the neck of the bottle and sniffed it. Brandy, he murmured. And something else. He turned. Have you noticed anything amiss in the brandy of late, Mrs. Danby? No, monsieur, she replied. But Sir Hugo had his own bottles. He didn't take from the household supply. Kept them locked in that cabinet. She pointed to a small cupboard in the corner. Poirot opened it. Inside, 3 more decanters, 2 empty, 1 sealed. He examined the empty ones closely. The faintest white residue clung to the base of one. He did not touch it. Very curious, he murmured. Poirot next requested Sir Hugo's full list of medications. Mrs. Danby hesitated but complied, producing a worn notebook from the pantry drawer. Dr. Armitage kept records. Sir Hugo liked order in all things. Poirot took the notebook and retired to the library. There, he sat in the window seat and pored over the entries. Digitalis, indeed. Prescribed daily in half-tablet doses. But 3 weeks ago, a curious note. Patient reports palpitations. Increased dosage advised, 1 tablet daily. Signed, F. Armitage. Poirot tapped the page. He turned to the previous page. The dosage adjustment was not consistent with the doctor's earlier caution. Poirot stood and went directly to Dr. Armitage's quarters in the East Wing. The doctor opened the door wearing an expression of surprise. Monsieur Poirot? I wish to verify something, Poirot said. You increased Sir Hugo's Digitalis dose recently. I did, yes. With caution. Poirot handed him the notebook. Then you won't mind confirming this signature. The doctor glanced at the page, then frowned. This isn't my handwriting. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Indeed. Someone forged my signature. It would appear so. And I suspect the forged entry is not the only thing that was altered. Armitage's face had paled. What are you suggesting? That someone tampered with Sir Hugo's medication, gradually, methodically. Enough to weaken him over days, perhaps weeks. The doctor looked sick. If he died from an overdose, I never noticed. The symptoms were consistent with natural decline. Poirot nodded slowly. Yes. And that, doctor, was precisely the point. Later that day, Poirot returned to the library with renewed purpose. He asked Miles and Lady Edith to join him for tea. When they arrived, Poirot made a show of pouring from the family's main brandy decanter, held in the drinks cabinet, not Sir Hugo's private supply. He offered Miles a glass. The young man accepted it without hesitation. Poirot watched him take a sip, then turned to Lady Edith. Would you like some, madam? She hesitated, just briefly. No, thank you, she said coolly. I prefer sherry. Poirot nodded, as if satisfied with her response. A servant entered just then, carrying a tray. This arrived in the Morning Post, he said. No sender. Just marked for Miss Lavington. Poirot intercepted it gently. Miss Lavington is resting, he said. I shall see to it personally. Once the servant had gone, Poirot opened the envelope. Inside, a single sheet of paper, unsigned. You shouldn't have spoken. He will not forgive betrayal twice. Watch the clocks. Poirot's fingers tightened around the note. He folded it carefully, pocketed it, and stood. Pardon me, Lady Edith, Miles. I must check on Isabel. Isabel's room was dim, the curtains drawn. She lay propped against pillows, eyes open but unfocused. Poirot sat gently on the edge of the bed. You received a note. She blinked, alarm flashing behind her eyes. You read it? I did. Her voice, when it came, was low. I didn't betray anyone. I just told you what I heard. I was frightened. Who do you believe sent the note? She hesitated. I don't know. But it wasn't a stranger. Poirot nodded. You believe it was someone in the house? She closed her eyes. Yes. Poirot stood. You need rest. But stay alert, mademoiselle. Even silence, sometimes, speaks volumes. That evening, Poirot returned to the clock room alone. The 3:07 clock was no longer ticking. But a new one was. A small brass carriage clock on the shelf opposite. Its hands pointed to 4:13. Poirot approached it, listened to its faint rhythm. Then he noticed the dust surrounding it had been disturbed. He lifted it carefully, and beneath it lay a note, torn from a diary. If the clocks are his confession, then I am his consequence. The truth is in the time, but no one wants to know what he truly did. Not even her. Poirot stood still for a long moment. The clocks were being used. Not just relics of obsession, but messages. Clues left behind, one tick at a time. Someone had taken up Sir Hugo's strange code, and was now using it to communicate, or to threaten. Poirot looked up at the faces of the clocks. 3:07, 4:13. 2:03. They were not random. Not to him. Later that night, Poirot opened his notebook and wrote a single sentence at the top of the page. If truth has a time, who controls the hour? He closed the book, extinguished the light, and whispered into the shadows. Tomorrow, we draw back the curtain. And the hour will strike. Chapter 7, The Gathering Storm. The following day dawned calm, almost eerily so. The storm had finally lifted, leaving a damp stillness clinging to the grounds of Coniston Hall. A milky light filtered through the trees, illuminating the house with a cold clarity. Poirot rose earlier than usual, though his routine remained precise, shaving, polishing his shoes, straightening the cuffs of his dove-grey suit. Today, he told himself, would require all the order he could muster, for disorder, he suspected, had very nearly claimed a life. By breakfast, he had already met with the gardener and the butler. Quietly, without fuss, he made arrangements. By the time the rest of the household sat down to buttered toast and eggs, a plan was in motion. Lady Edith was first to arrive. Impeccably dressed in a charcoal wool skirt and silk blouse, she greeted Poirot with the faintest tilt of the head. "Monsieur Poirot," she said coolly. "I trust you are well this morning." "As well as can be expected, madam," he replied with a smile. "Though I confess, I am troubled. This house, so elegant, so dignified, harbors too many secrets." "Every family has secrets," she said, stirring her tea. "We simply don't air them over breakfast." Miles joined them shortly after, followed by Dr. Armitage and a pale Isabel, walking slowly with the aid of a cane. The bruise at her temple was fading, but the uncertainty in her eyes remained. "I'm glad you're up," Poirot said gently. "I needed to be," Isabel replied. "I can't hide forever." Poirot's gaze swept across the table. "No," he said softly. "None of us can." Mid-morning, Poirot summoned Lady Edith to the drawing-room. She entered with grace, chin high, hands folded before her. "I assume you've uncovered something you believe to be scandalous," she said. "Not scandalous, madam. Only tragic." She raised an eyebrow. "I know about the forged entry in Dr. Armitage's medical book," Poirot said. "And I know someone adjusted Sir Hugo's dosage behind the doctor's back." Her expression remained unchanged. "You've drawn quite the conclusion." "I have not drawn it, Lady Edith. I have arrived at it, step by step." Poirot moved closer. "You see, you did not intend to kill him, did you? Only to frighten him. A punishment. A reminder. You wanted to control the moment. But time, as your husband often said, is not easily mastered." Silence stretched. At last, her shoulders sagged ever so slightly. "I only wanted to stop him from bringing shame on us all," she said. "He was going to bring Grey here. Welcome him like family. Hand him a fortune that should have stayed with us." "Because Grey knew the truth," Poirot said gently. She stiffened. "The truth? That Sir Hugo did not simply abandon him in the mine. That he caused the collapse." Lady Edith's hands clenched. "He panicked," she whispered. "He made the wrong call. And instead of owning it, he paid to bury it." "And you helped," Poirot said. She looked at him sharply. I protected this family. He stepped back, his voice softening. And yet, your efforts to preserve order, like the clocks, only stopped time. They did not erase it. That afternoon, Poirot requested a walk with Miles in the gardens. They strolled slowly along the gravel path, past rows of wet hedges and sodden rose bushes. I've told you everything I know, Miles said. You've spoken to my mother. She's the one who couldn't stand Grey. True. But I suspect you knew more than you admitted. Miles said nothing. Poirot stopped beside the sundial. You knew your father meant to alter the will again. Miles turned to him, startled. How? Poirot smiled. The solicitor was not as discreet as he believed. Sir Hugo had scheduled a meeting with him the week after his death. Miles swallowed. Yes, he said at last. I found the letter in his study. He was going to leave more to Grey. Maybe even give him part of the estate. I was furious. I'd spent years trying to clean up the mess father left. And he was about to hand it to the very man who nearly ruined us. But you did not stop him. No, Miles looked away. I wanted to, but I didn't. Poirot gave a small nod. And that makes you the one honest person in this house. Miles blinked. I beg your pardon. Poirot turned to him with a kind smile. The only one who let the past be what it was. The rest have tried to rewrite it. That evening, Poirot called for a gathering in the drawing room. Firelight flickered against the polished walls. Rain had begun again outside, light but steady. The air crackled with tension. Lady Edith, Miles, Isabel, Dr. Armitage, and Mrs. Danby stood or sat in wary silence. Poirot stepped forward. I have gathered you here because the time has come for truth. He held up the diary scrap found beneath the ticking carriage clock. If the clocks are his confession, then I am his consequence. He looked at Isabel. You wrote this. Her face paled. Yes. After the letter he received from Grey. I knew. I felt that something terrible was coming. Poirot nodded. Sir Hugo feared Grey not because of guilt alone, but because he knew Grey still held proof of what happened in Rhodesia. He turned to Lady Edith. And you, madam, feared Grey because you helped cover it up. You told your husband he'd never be forgiven. And you made sure the clock stopped ticking until someone started them again. He stepped toward the fireplace. Grey was never going to arrive. He sent word he would come, yes, but he never set foot in England again. From his coat pocket, Poirot withdrew a letter. A reply from the Bulawayo postmaster, he explained. Alistair Grey died of illness 2 months ago. The letter Hugo received was sent by his son. Murmurs rippled. Poirot raised a hand. But the idea of Grey returning was enough. Lady Edith increased the digitalis. Not to kill, but to weaken. The brandy glass? Tainted just enough to tip the balance. He turned slowly, eyes landing on each of them. And someone else, was watching all of this unfold. He looked directly at Mrs. Danby. You were the only one with unrestricted access to the study, the medicine cabinet, the west wing, and the clocks. She looked at him, wide-eyed. You removed the watch. You reset the clocks. And you sent the letters, to me, to Isabel. Why? Mrs. Danby swallowed. Because someone had to speak for him. For Grey. For the truth. Sir Hugo confessed to me, years ago. I begged him to make it right. Her eyes welled with tears. He never did. Poirot nodded gravely. And so you did. Tick by tick. 1 clock at a time. He let the silence settle before adding, softly, Tomorrow, I will explain all, tout le monde, as they say. But tonight, let us rest. For the final hour approaches. And outside, as if in agreement, the wind began to rise. Chapter 8. The Mind of Hercule Poirot. The drawing room at Coniston Hall was unusually still. Logs crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the antique wallpaper. The clocks, which had once stood frozen in time, now surrounded the occupants with an air of foreboding. They were silent still, but somehow louder than ever. At the center of the room, in a high-backed armchair, sat Hercule Poirot. His suit was immaculate, his moustache perfectly waxed, and his expression unreadable. Around him sat the suspects, Lady Edith, statuesque and cold, Miles, tense and pale, Isabel, pale but alert, Dr. Armitage, arms folded across his chest, and finally Mrs. Danby, hands knotted tightly in her lap, her usual composure faded to anxious stillness. Poirot cleared his throat. "Miss Amos," he began, "the hour has come. You have been patient while I investigated the strange matter of Sir Hugo Lavington's death. Now, at last, I offer you the truth." He rose, walking slowly across the room as he spoke. "This case has been one of layers, not unlike the rings of an old tree, each circle hiding a truth within. It began with a death declared natural. But something, many things, felt wrong. A glass untouched by lips. A pocket watch vanished. Clocks stopped at seemingly random times. And a letter, anonymous, urgent, pleading for my arrival before any crime had been officially committed." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "Let us begin, then, with the letter." He held it up, the note that had summoned him. This letter, written before Sir Hugo's death, came not from a stranger, but from someone within this house. Someone who knew something was going to happen and feared no one would speak. That someone was Miss Isabel Lavington. Isabel gasped, shrinking slightly in her chair. Poirot raised a hand. "Do not be alarmed, mademoiselle. Yours was not the hand of guilt, but of conscience." He turned to the others. Isabel heard arguments. Saw changes in her uncle. And most significantly, saw Lady Edith burning a letter from Alistair Gray. Lady Edith stiffened, but said nothing. "Yes," Poirot continued. "Sir Hugo had been in correspondence with Gray, or rather, Gray's son. Unbeknownst to anyone, Gray had died months before. But the idea of his return was enough to unsettle Sir Hugo, and threaten the facade this family had maintained for decades." He moved to stand behind Lady Edith's chair. "You, madam, feared the consequences of your husband's remorse. And you, more than anyone, understood how deeply the truth could cost. You were there in Rhodesia. You helped bury what happened. But Sir Hugo, in his own way, sought penance. He altered the will. Planned to invite Gray's son here. And that, you could not allow. She said quietly, he would have destroyed the family. No, Poirot said gently. He would have saved it, by telling the truth." Lady Edith looked away. Poirot now turned to Dr. Armitage. "You, Doctor, were unwittingly drawn into this. A forged signature in your records increased Sir Hugo's dosage of digitalis. Enough to cause confusion, weakness, and death." Armitage paled. "I swear to you, I had no idea." "I believe you," Poirot said. "The forgery was crude, but effective. It masked a murder as natural decline." He looked at Miles. "And you, monsieur? You were not the killer. But you were aware that your father intended to reduce your inheritance. You found the solicitor's letter, and you burned it." Miles's jaw clenched. "I only wanted to protect what was ours." Poirot gave a small nod. "Even so, your inaction played its part." Now he turned to the final figure, Mrs. Danby. You, madam, were the keeper of time in this house. You held the keys. You managed the clocks. You listened. And when you heard that Grey's son would not be arriving, you understood that Sir Hugo's confession would die with him. Mrs. Danby looked up at him. Her eyes were tired. He told me everything, she said softly. About the mine. About Grey. About how he'd paid for his silence and couldn't bear it any longer. He said he was going to make it right. And you believed him. I did. Poirot nodded. And yet, after his death, you acted. You restarted the clocks. You planted clues. You sent notes, one to me, one to Isabel, to stir the truth into motion. I wanted the truth out, she whispered. But I didn't want anyone hurt. Poirot looked around the room. And yet, someone was hurt. He walked to the hearth. Isabel was pushed from the stairs the night after I arrived. That, ladies and gentlemen, was not an accident. Gasps rose. Isabel gripped her chair. Poirot looked directly at Lady Edith. You pushed her, madam. In the dark. You believed she had told me everything. You wanted to silence her. No, Lady Edith said quietly. I only meant to frighten her. Poirot's expression hardened. The distinction is immaterial. She closed her eyes. Poirot now moved back to the center of the room. But even you, madam, did not poison your husband. A beat of silence. Poirot turned, slowly, toward the fireplace. I have left one piece until last. The glass of brandy. He lifted it, holding it up. This glass was tampered with. But not by Lady Edith. He turned. It was you, Dr. Armitage. The doctor shot to his feet. That's a lie. Poirot's voice was calm. You feared what Sir Hugo's confession would mean for you. You were complicit in the cover-up. You were there when the first settlement to Grey was made, and you signed the false medical reports in Rhodesia. You saw the pattern repeating. You saw the will being changed. And you knew that Grey's son, if he arrived, would reveal everything. Armitage's face had gone ashen. You increased the dosage quietly, disguised as a doctor's correction. And when it wasn't enough, you used the poison brandy. Miles stood, furious. You bastard, he trusted you. Poirot's voice rose. And then you sent another note, to frighten Isabel. You pushed her, believing she was the leak. But it was never her. He turned to Mrs. Danby. It was the clocks. They told me everything. Not with noise, but with silence. Each marked a time of guilt. But the 3:07 clock, that was Sir Hugo's own. And the time of his death. Poirot stepped back, his voice softer now. All you ever needed to do was look at what had stopped. Armitage slumped into a chair. Lady Edith wept silently. Miles stared at the fire, broken. Isabel exhaled, as though breathing freely for the first time in days. Poirot looked at them all. The clocks have struck their final hour. The truth, at last, is told. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Time, Miss Amos, does not heal all wounds. But it does reveal them, given enough patience. And Hercule Poirot, as you have seen, has that in abundance. With that, he departed, order restored, the mystery solved, and the ticking of justice echoing in his wake.